My name is Dave Hollenbach, the host of From Embers to Excellence. My goal is to explore the many facets of leadership from the perspectives of some amazing people. In addition to leadership, I like to discuss mental health, PTSD, and overcoming adversity. If you have a favorite episode, I would love to hear about it. Message me through social media or my website, and I will share some free tools to help you achieve your goals. Please like, subscribe, and leave a review. If you haven't purchased your copy of my book, Fireproof, please grab a copy today. Thanks for listening. Today, I'm speaking with Doug Utberg. He is the founder and principal for Terminal Value Consulting, the host of the Terminal Value podcast. He began his 20 years of progressive leadership experience in corporate finance and technology. He attained a Master of Business Administration, an MBA. He served in the Marine Corps Reserve, and he had this successful career in the corporate world. And when the pandemic hit all of us, it really led to a change for Doug, and he started his podcast and his consulting firm, and we're going to dig in a little bit to that. But I want to welcome you to the show, Doug, and thank you for coming on, man.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dave. And when Dave says a change, what he means by that is I got a half-hour appointment on my calendar on a Monday with no subject. It came on my calendar about an hour before I was supposed to attend. So I thought this looks odd, but okay. So I just log in, and then our new chief information officer said, well, due to ongoing cost constraints, your position's being eliminated. HR comes on the phone, says, we're going to send the information for your severance package to your personal address. If you have any questions, go ahead and reply. 5 minutes later, my network access is cut off.
Wow.
Yeah. So yeah, that's kind of the career life low point. It's like, and the From Embers feels very I can relate with that. So then, going out of there, of course, I put in hundreds and hundreds of applications and got nothing, because this is back when 40 million people were unemployed. And so, what I ultimately ended up doing was I ultimately said, okay, I've always wanted to go down the entrepreneurial path, but I've been like, no, the timing's not right. No, I have a family, I have a corporate career. And I'm like, okay, it's time to just do it. And the thing that at least that I've really found is that, it's more important to decide that you're going to do something and go all in than it is to know exactly how you're going to do it, because it's almost certain that the way you have it planned is not how it's going to go. So you're going to have to do a lot of pivoting around the way. It's way more important that you say, okay, whatever walls I've come up against, I'm going to figure out a way to either go above, over it, under it, around it. Versus if you're just kind of dabbling, then the first wall you hit, you'd be like, oh, I'm out. That's too much. I'm going back. And I think it's a hard path, but like the way that kind of just for me, the reason why this kind of career path really resonates with me is that it's something that nobody else can fire me from, right? And I decide when I'm done, and it's ideally something that I like doing and that I can continue doing for as long as I want to. Because the thing that I kept observing about the kind of your normal, whether it's fire is a similar type of thing, although in a lot of fire departments you have a pension, but still it's based, if you're in a corporate career path, what you do is okay, you go to school, you get your job, you work, you progress, you kind of keep going through, and then at some point the road ends. And then, if the road ends nicely, you might, retire, get a package, get a pension, whatever, or you just get dropped on the ground and if you're over about 55 or so, you're going to have a really hard time getting another permanent position, just because you're close enough to the end to where it's not ROI positive for a lot of people to bring you on board. And, when I stopped and thought about that, I'm like, that's really not a great model. I mean, it has the benefit of a steady paycheck for as long as the steady paychecks last. But other than that, there's really not an awesome end game. I don't know a whole lot of people who have retired out of that normal type of situation who have really enjoyed it as much as they thought they would. And because the reason why that happens, or at least my observation of the reason why that happens, is because in order to be successful, you have to work hard and you have to focus and you have to make sacrifices. And by the time you do that for 40 years, you've given up a lot of other parts of your life. And so that now when you say, all right, you're at the end of the sidewalk, go do whatever you want, it's like the only thing I've ever done is work.
Yeah.
This is what I've done. And now you have to try to figure out a new life's passion when you put pretty much every waking moment for 4 decades into work.
Yeah. Yeah, it almost sounds like you're advertising for Tim Ferriss's book, you know.
Well, so yes, it's funny. Yeah, I have a love-hate relationship with Tim, and that's said tongue in cheek because he and I were both born the same year. So I've subscribed and unsubscribed from his newsletter about 20 times because when I read about all the cool stuff that he does, I get super jealous, and I'm like, oh, but he has so many good ideas. But then I get super jealous, and so I'm human just like everybody else.
Yeah, yeah. Man, so one thing that I want to touch on, but we'll have to circle back to it because I want
Yeah,
to set the stage. But I want to touch on those days that followed
yep,
your separation from your corporate career.
uh-huh,
But let's go back to where you were born and raised, and maybe some
sure.
of your early influences that kind of inspired you to follow the path that you did.
Sure. Well, so I grew up in Oregon. I actually still live in Oregon, and so for the probably the easiest way to explain it is, most people who have heard of the state of Oregon know that the biggest city in Oregon is Portland. Well, actually, a lot of people know about Portland now because of all the riots that happened that happened in
Right.
the last couple of years. So if you go a little ways to the east of Portland, there's a suburb called Gresham. That's where I grew up. It was a blue collar town. And my dad was I think my dad was the second oldest of 4 kids. My mom was the oldest of 5 kids. But my dad was the Dave Ramsey program before there was a Dave Ramsey program. He was beans and rice, rice and beans about more or less everything, and they're still like that. They live in a house that they bought in 1979 for I think $63,000. Of course, it's paid off. Carpet's original. Kitchen is original. If the appliances still worked, they'd be original. My dad he does not spend a single nickel that he doesn't absolutely have to. I think growing up, I think it was we had a TV antenna that was in the garage. That I think that got 4 channels and only about 1 to 2 were clear at any given time. I think the first cell phone my parents had was on my plan, and they're still on my plan to this day. And so and of course, right, it's not that they it's not that they didn't love my sister and I, but it's just that we grew up extremely frugally. And because for my dad, that was his way, that was the way that he felt like he could stay in control of his life. Because his story is he graduated from his undergraduate studies at Portland State University with a mechanical engineering degree in 1967. That was not the most amazing time to graduate from college because he was immediately drafted and shipped off to Vietnam. And so 3 years later, he bounces out of the army and his degree is basically obsolete. So his options are either A, go back for about 2 more years of undergraduate and try to get into an engineering firm and sort of kind of get back to where he should have been 5 years ago, or kind of pivot. And what he ended up doing was he ended up taking a number of classes through the community college, and he ended up eventually at the at working for the city of Portland, working on in their kind of finance and accounting department doing grants, which he's exceptionally detail oriented, so he was really good at it. But of course, he's also exceptionally linear and literal, so city politics were really not his thing, and so he eventually ended up moving out to the to a treatment plant. Which actually did have which had a silver lining, because when he moved out of City Hall and kind of out to the outskirts of the government, then he was able to have more flexibility in his work timing, and he could come with me to Boy Scout camp.
Well, and so was he like the troop leader?
So he was the committee chair. My dad absolutely detests being up in front of people. He will absolutely work like an Oompa Loompa, in the back channels, but he does not like being in front of people.
Uh, so he was really involved in, and the Boy Scouts. So I was a Cub Scout and a Weeblo, and I never went on to become a Boy Scout. But it is an environment where you develop those good self-leadership
Mhm.
skills, um, and sense of community and all that. And uh, having your father involved in that, I
And
would
yeah,
imagine.
my son's in Boy Scouts right now, and so because I earned my Eagle in 1992, which I was just thinking, I'm like, wow, that was 30 years ago. but but yeah, so my son's involved in Boy Scouts now, and it's a lot of fun to be able to do stuff with him, and kind of go out. Of course, the way that it kind of works a lot of times as an adult leader is, I'm involved, I'm there with my son, but like whenever we go out to, say, summer camp or a camp out or something like that, he's usually off with his friends doing stuff. So I'm there, but it's not like it's not like I'm tailing around with him everywhere. But the thing is, but with kids, right? It makes a difference when they know their parents are there.
Yeah. So talk to me a little bit about your years after high school, where you went to college, and maybe some of the early life
Sure,
lessons.
sure.
uh
Yeah, so the now I describe my life as the Gen X, the Generation X right life playbook. Meaning that when I grew up, the assumption was that there is a right way and a wrong way that you're supposed to do things. And the right way is you're supposed to go to school, study really hard, and then you're supposed to get good grades and go to a good college, and then you're supposed to get a good job, and you're supposed to advance. Then you're supposed to have a family, you're supposed to get a house, all of that, kind of, white picket fence, American dream kind of stuff. And that was what I did. I did, I just nose to the grindstone in high school. I did my undergrad at Portland State. I, joined the Marines, as an Eagle Scout. I think I did 2 mission trips to Mexico with my youth group when I was when I was in church. I was church council president at our parish. I think right now I'm on the board of elders, the Toastmasters, Rotary. I think I did got my MBA in 2004. I was at Intel for 18 years. Was moving up there. I ended up moving over to Lattice Semiconductor for a couple of years until my separation, and right, was doing that. Was doing that go climb the ladder kind of Gen X thing. I mean, it's not just Gen Xers, but I feel like in the Gen X, kind of was sort of that nexus where that social pressure, I feel, kind of hit its zenith. And then, a lot, kind of sort of starting with the millennial generation, people like, whoa, hey, we're gonna kind of do this our own way. Um, us actors were not like that. It's like there is a right way and a wrong way to do this.
yeah.
I mean, and just a little bit of a tangent, I'll say, I think that is actually one of the things that I think is very healthy that some of the, kind of the millennials, Gen Zers are developing, is there is a much greater awareness of mental health and the importance of keeping everything in perspective. The whole idea of balance and perspective is just completely out the window with my gen. It's just, there's you just drive, achieve, go, and just sort of ignore everything else. That's not a recipe for good mental health. That's a recipe for for depression, for for PTSD, for for all kinds of things, for self-medicating with alcohol, and just and so I think that's my really, really long way of saying that, I was, my formative years were very much along the lines of I need to go, I need to, there's, I want to make my parents proud. I want to make the people that are working for me proud. It was a lot of people pleasing, looking for external validation, trying to achieve that through trying to achieve that through doing really well in the career, kind of checking all the boxes that I felt like I was supposed to check. And it's not that any of those are bad things, but if you're doing it because you think if you're doing it because it's what you think somebody else wants you to do, not because it's what you really want to do, I think you will run into a cliff at some point. And I think that was kind of the emotional psychological thing that I ran into. Was eventually I have to say, okay, well, why have I been doing all of this for so long? I just never really asked that question. Um, and I think that there's an increasing number of people who are kind of saying, okay, what is it that I really want my life to be like? And why have I been doing what I've been doing for as long as I have?
Yeah, and so you essentially reached that point,
Yes.
uh,
Not
not
all at
exact.
once. It's been a couple of years. The cook time's been about a year or two. I didn't quite get there all at once. I'm sure that if my wife described it, she would describe a series of irrational, of unexpected irrational decisions that, the half-baked irrational decisions that kind of meandered from one place to another without a whole lot of explanation.
Well, let's talk about the the days that followed
Yeah.
that last meeting that you had,
Yes.
and and maybe how you processed that
Mhm.
experience, and how you were able to pivot and come to the conclusion that you needed to start
Yeah.
your own consulting firm.
Yeah. Well, so of course, the first thing is, I have to tell my wife. And the situation we were in was that we were a single income household. So it was, I had my job, and then she was principally focused on taking care of the kids and the family and the household. So where we stepped into was, we don't have any income now, which is, not a recipe for enjoyable conversations. So the initial, I guess you would call, shock and awe, traumatic stress, you know, that knock-on effect lasted for a while. And then I was like, okay, well, I just need to put my nose back to the grindstone, right? Because I'm a good Gen Xer. So I'm like, okay, well, if I hit a problem, I'll just work harder. So I go and I do a whole bunch of job applications. I either get ghosted or get a form rejection letter. So I'm like, okay, I just need to work harder at it. And then, about the 300 or 400 mark, I'm like, okay, this isn't working. I've got to do something different. And now deciding that I'm going to start my own thing is not like okay, hey, now I've got a whole bunch of income coming in. It's okay, I have a thing I'm doing, but I still need to figure out some way that I can generate income in the short term while I'm trying to get this thing off the ground. And so all in all, it ends up being more work. But I think that, just sort of at least kind of where I was at was, I was just at a place where I was like, okay, I can't unexperience what I just went through. And so, at least it feels to me that if I'm not actively working to make something different, kind of from here on out, it's really just a matter of time before the same kind of thing happens again. I mean, I think that, when you've never had a bad experience, you can fool yourself into thinking that it won't happen. Once you've gone through it, you're like, okay, these kind of things do happen. They happen, and B, they can happen to me. So now I have to think, okay, what am I going to do about this? Just kind of, avoidance is no longer an option.
Did you start the podcast before or after you started the doing consulting?
Um, Excellent question. So I started right about the same time. And because my idea there was that the podcast would be my primary means of business development. Now, it turns out that that was a really bad assumption because it takes forever to get a podcast off the ground. But I think it ended up being what I would call a high quality mistake. Because I think, in the kind of, in the contemporary era, right, having, building and preserving an audience of people who identify with you is probably the most valuable business asset that exists. Because if you think of pretty much just about any company, right, its value is in its customer base. Because like if you go to like any of the gurus, thought leaders, whatever, the moment one of them passes away, their estate will sell off all of their intellectual property for almost nothing. The reason being that without an actively cultivated customer base, there's not a lot of value in the stuff. And so it's and so what I would say from that is anybody who's listening, if you're contemplating starting a podcast or a YouTube channel or both, or building some kind of audience, start. Just start. It will be a ton of work. You will see no return from it for a really, really long time. But if a career that is outside of the kind of normal, what I would call it, corporate pension mode, if that is where you are headed or where you want to head, start now, because it's probably the single best thing you can do.
For those listeners that maybe haven't heard your podcast, can you talk a little bit about what your podcast is about, the kind
Sure.
of people that you interview, that sort of thing?
Sure. So terminal value is based around kind of a big question, and that big question is, how do growth-oriented people transform their business and life to world class? So when I initially started, it was just business, but then I had a little light bulb moment where I'm like, okay, well, if you just focus on business and you ignore the rest of your life, you're going to fall off the cliff. And so it's really business and life, meaning that you have to keep all of those pieces connected. And so what I do is it's principally interviews, although I do a number of solo episodes as well. And I'm starting to work in kind of more vlog types of things, just basically talking through what I'm experiencing as I'm going through, my whatever you call it, I call it is whatever you say that I'm doing right now. But what I do is I talk to a lot of thought leaders and business leaders just about some piece of that, either world class achievement or transformation. Because the idea being that if you listen to the show for long enough, you will absorb the tools that you need to do that for your own life.
Where does the name terminal value come from?
Excellent question. So this is an homage back to my finance nerd background. So when people in finance are doing a discounted cash flow analysis, usually what will happen is you'll be looking at, say, a business investment or whatever, and you'll look at, say, 5 or 10 years or whatever cash flows. And then what you do is you say, okay, based on that last year of cash flow, we think it's going to grow at X% more or less indefinitely. And that amount, you call that the terminal value. And then, in other words, kind of whatever you think that long tail is, and then you discount that back. And so it's a little bit of a double entendre because, of course, it comes from that discounted cash flow analysis, but almost every discounted cash flow is heavily dependent on those terminal value assumptions. And in a lot of cases, they're nonsense because nothing grows linear forever, even if it's just 3 or 5%, right? There's always volatility. So it's a little bit of an inside joke for big time finance nerds.
Nice. Yeah. And for those of you listening, if you haven't already heard the interview that I did with Doug, he interviewed me on his show, and thank you, Doug, for having me on. It was a great
Thank you. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah. Yeah. And so it just worked out really nice that I was able to interview you and just, share. And
Yeah.
I really appreciate, well, I always appreciate having conversations with other podcasters because they tend to flow a little better, than somebody that has never been on a podcast before,
Yeah. Well, and the thing that I really like about the podcast medium, and I think it's actually even moving more there now, but is that podcasting tends to be very authentic. Because the traditional media, of course, is very scripted, very rehearsed. If you put on Fox or CNN or whoever, they're reading off a teleprompter, right? There's okay, you have 45 seconds for this cut. It's scripted out. Podcasts, well, some are scripted, but most usually aren't, and I think that's where you get more authentic conversations, because I think there's a big sort of vacuum in the market right now for people who are real. And the other thing that I really like about podcasts is that a lot of podcasts are done by people who are just normal people. Of course, NPR does their podcast and Harvard Business Review does their podcast, but the overwhelming majority are people who have an idea and they decide to go out and make a show. It is the real definition of creators, which I think there's real value in that. Because those are the places where you will find ideas that haven't been filtered through a corporate management committee.
One thing that we didn't really touch on, I mean, we kind of just like brushed over it, was your time in the Marine Corps Reserves. And
Yeah.
I'd love to hear a little bit about your experience there, what you did, maybe some lessons learned from that perspective.
Sure. So I joined the Marines the summer after my first year in college. And because I think the recruiter got me all jacked up on raw Marine Corps, dress blues, all that kind of good stuff. And so the specialty that I was in was called combat engineer, which basically means construction and explosives. If anybody ever wants advice on how to blow something up, then I'm more than happy to talk with them. But at the time, what I actually had planned on doing was I was actually at the time planning on going into the Marine Corps flight program. So I attended a cycle of officer candidate school in between my second and third year of college. But I ultimately opted out because flight has a 10-year commitment after flight school, which takes 2 years. So that means 12 years. So I wasn't deciding whether I wanted to fly. I was really deciding whether I wanted the next 20 years of my life to be in the Marines, because the way that military retirement goes is that you become pension eligible after 20 years. Well, if you put in 12, you're kind of silly to not stick around for the last 8. So, because like what a lot of people do is they'll do what they call the one and done. This is where you sign up for 3 years, you get the experience, you get it on your resume, and then you're out. You go and live a regular life. But signing up for 20 is a different level of commitment, and I don't know if I was quite ready to do that yet. And of course, right, I don't know. Maybe it would have been maybe that would have been the right call. I don't know, but
so talk a little bit about that time frame in the United States when you signed up and went to school and all that.
So yes, so very very astute point. So yeah, I started my enlistment started in 1997. I think it was like January 7th. So yeah, that's when I went through recruit training, kind of went to engineer school, did all that stuff. And of course there was this thing that happened, just about 4 years after that, called September 11th. Which incidentally, September 11th was less than a month from my wedding. My wife and I were married on October 6th of 2001. And so, one of the first things that my wife said after they, when we were seeing the news coverage, was she turns to me and said, "They better not send you anywhere until after the honeymoon." Because of course, September 11th happens and we all get notice that says, okay, don't leave town, make sure all of your gear is ready. Everybody needs to be deployment ready. And oddly enough, so my enlistment ended in December of 2002. And in January of 2003, everybody was stop lost and shipped off to the Persian Gulf, because I think that's when that's when Iraq round 2 happened.
Yeah, man, crazy, isn't it?
I know, it's just utter complete dumb luck timing.
How about some of the lessons that you learned, leadership lessons from the Marine Corps?
Sure. So I think the big thing that I took out of the Marine Corps is how important it is to just improvise and work with what you have. Because especially in the Marines, they're the least well funded of all the branches of the military, and it is not even close. So what that means is, there are, well, Marines are usually pretty good about maintaining the equipment, but nothing else is, everything else is missing something. So you have to improvise for almost everything. You'll never have the supplies you need, never have the materials you need. There will always be not enough of whatever you need. And so, for me, the most important thing that I took out of it, was really to say, okay, if there's something you need to do, instead of saying, okay, well, I don't have what I need, I'm just going to wait. You say, okay, well, this is what we need to do. Let's just go figure it out. And, I think that if you take that, if you take that attitude and apply it to literally every part of your life, then there's no stopping you. Now, of course, the thing is, when I was young, and I thought, okay, we apply this to Marine missions, and I got it. It's crossing that attitude into different domains of your life sometimes takes a little while, because that real adapt, improvise, overcome, and then basically saying, how can I get to where I need to go, versus saying, hey, it's just not going to work. Because it's really, it's really easy to step back and say it's not going to work, and it is a ton of mental effort to try to figure out how to improvise your way to a goal. And I think that, in at least speaking for myself, that trying to put that kind of mental effort into every part of my life was something I was not capable of in my 20s.
What is next on the horizon for you? Are you dabbling in any other new ventures? Do you have any new passions that you're working on?
So I think that's a really good question. And I'm just going to take us on a little bit of a tangent, but I promise we'll get back to topic, because I think what's next is something that you really always have to ask yourself, because, because, like, for example, there may be something you're working on right now, and it may, you may get an offer you can't refuse and you decide to sell, or something may happen and you end up needing to fold it up. But if there's no next, then whenever one of those two things happen, you'll end up being at a loss and just kind of staring at the wall. So that's one of the things that I always try to think of is, right, what is that next thing that I want to pursue? And the other thing that I try to think about as well is that, all of us who are in business, most of us are in business because we want to try to make money. Well, but the thing that none of us think about is that, okay, once you do, make, say, whether it's 1,000, 100,000, million, billion, whatever, once you do make whatever amount of money you think you need, you will get to the point where you can address the problems that money solves, but there are a whole bunch of other parts of life that money can't solve. And so, to me, the what's next is really where you're figuring out what are those things that money can't solve, and how do I want to address those? And the thing that really resonates with me, or that I really keep thinking about, is how can I help help assist or whatever, the generations of younger folks who are coming up right now, that really that probably just don't really know how they're supposed to make their way in the world, because if you're going into college, it's an extreme amount of cost to go through college. If you're doing 4 years at most state schools, that's going to run you close to, right around 100,000 if you're in-state, in-state tuition, because, like, the way I did it, I did 2 years of junior college and 2 years of state school. So it ended up being a lot less expensive, but even so, even if you cut all the corners, it's still a lot of money. And so you have those student loans to pay back. And now, the amount of traditional corporate career path, career jobs, those are going down. So those are less likely. So, a lot of people are probably going to say, okay, well, maybe I'll be some kind of entrepreneur, but, like, what does that mean? How do you do that? How do you learn about that? I think those things that a lot of people have interest in, but it's really hard to, it's not hard to acquire those skills if you know where to look. It's hard to know where to look without burning a lot of time and money. And so I think the next for me, or where I'm really thinking about putting my mental energies in the future, is trying to figure out how it can help close that gap. Because I really feel like the entrepreneurs of the future are where are where the great advances are going to come from. It's not going to come from the monster corporations. It won't come from Walmart or Procter and Gamble. Well, they're trying to extend their current product lines. The new ideas that will like literally change the world are going to come from someone you haven't heard of.
And I liked what you said about, when you come to that realization that money can do a lot to solve certain problems, but when you realize that money doesn't solve everything for you,
yes,
where do you go from there?
Correct. Yes. And well, because of course, a lot of us were, what I got drilled into my head was, you need to work really hard, get a good job so you can earn a really good income. And you just have this sort of inbuilt assumption that if you make enough money, everything will be fine. Well, if you make enough money, some things will be fine. Other things may not be, because like, for example, one of the things, at least that I've observed, is that, if you attain either a high degree of wealth or income, one of the things that does is that makes it very easy for you to engage in a whole lot of self-destructive activities. It can, like, say, if you sign a $100 million contract with NBA, Major League Baseball, whatever, okay, there is no limit to the amount of alcohol, cocaine, amphetamines, any other kind of stuff that you can consume, because you can just keep going like this and get more.
It's got to be rough,
Yeah. Well, and that's, I guess, that's one of the things, is that because like a lot of times I think like I'll read about some ridiculous movie deal contract, or athlete contract. I'm like, oh man, what would it be like to have all have all those resources? I'm like, well, I don't know. There's not evidence that many of those people are all that much more happier than you or I are.
Yeah.
And so there's not a lot of objective evidence of that.
Yeah. True, man. Is there anything, before we go, any last comments, nuggets of wisdom that you'd like to share with the audience? Maybe something that we didn't touch on that you feel we should?
Well, I think one of the things that we probably didn't spend as much time on as we'd originally planned was, we didn't get into leadership quite as much. And if I can just get a couple of minutes to stand on a soapbox there.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Yeah. So when it comes to leadership, I'd say leadership is probably the topic that I think is the most important for people in organizations, and B, has the most BS out in the marketplace. Because basically anybody who has had some kind of success, more or less, they can get published to write a book on leadership. But that doesn't necessarily mean that what they're writing about has anything to do with real quality leadership. Because what leadership is really about, at least to me, is about getting people to buy into what you're doing and follow you because they want to. So if you need any kind of positional authority to get people to buy into what you're doing and follow you, you're not a leader. And when you look at it from that lens, it takes a much, much different spin, right? Because what most people write about and talk about as leadership is really management. It's really figuring out, okay, well, how do you organize a group of people to be able to do certain tasks in a certain way at a certain consistency, which is all authority-based, and that's management, which has its place. But leadership is about saying, okay, how do I get people to buy into a cause, take action on their own, and then do something that they otherwise would not have wanted to move that cause forward. Within a company, or like a fire department or something like that, that cause could be the excellence of your department, the excellence of your company, or whatever. That cause could be that cause could be for protecting the environment. There's all kinds of causes that those can go around, but leadership is really about getting people inspired by an idea, and then them taking action because they want to move that idea forward. And so I think that if people are going to take one idea out of the portfolio of nuggets that we've talked about today, it's really to think about leadership from the context of inspiring people to want to take action toward that vision.
And so in that vein, what set of skills and behaviors establishes someone as, a great leader?
Well, I think empirically, it's if people want to follow them. The probably the best leading indicator is enthusiasm. I think I can't take credit for this. I think it was Zig Ziglar who said that sales is a transfer of enthusiasm from the salesperson to the prospect. And so if you think about leadership as selling ideas, what you are essentially doing is you are exuding so much enthusiasm about a vision or an idea that whoever you are interacting with, that they catch some of that, are magnetized by it, and want to move toward it.
Well, and that's great if it's a short-term interaction, but if you're talking about long-term interactions,
that's hard to keep up for a long time.
Right. So the behaviors and those characteristics of that individual, the leader,
Yeah.
In your experience, what are those traits that have inspired you?
So the things that okay, that's a really good question. So the leaders that really inspire me, and it's actually comparatively few, because when the people that really inspire me is where I say I would want their whole life, not just their income, not just their job, but like the whole life that they've created. Because a lot of people who I've known and observed who are in very high stations have some part of their life that's more or less a smoldering dumpster fire. Usually it's around either their health, relationships, or both. And so at least for me, the big thing is to make sure that you are keeping your whole life in context, which is make sure that you're addressing your own health, your physical health, your mental health. Make sure that you're keeping that you're addressing your relationships. And but the way that I think about relationships is, right, they're either say there's your family relationships, your spouse, significant other, and then if you have kids, of course, it would be your kids. But if you don't, even if you don't have kids yet, it's what are you doing to help the next generation come along and learn and develop and grow? And so I think that, at least to me, the really effective leaders are the people who understand and address all of those pieces of their life, not just the job at hand or not just the thing they're doing. Because, it's really easy. Well, it's not easy. It's easier to be good at one thing if you ignore everything else. It's a lot harder to put weight into all of the things that really matter.
For me, hearing everything that you just said, to like maybe distill it a little bit, it's almost pretty simple, that the leader that you would most likely follow, if given a choice of many different leaders, is an individual that you would want to emulate, somebody that is setting the example. And so the advice you would give to people that want to be a great leader is to
be a great person,
lead by example, be somebody that you can be proud of being, and that other people are looking at as the prime example of someone they want to be.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. You want to be the type of person that somebody else would want to emulate without having to fake it. And you may have to fake it a little bit at first, but you want to get to where you don't have to fake it, because that will get exhausting very quickly.
Awesome, man. Well, so for those listening that want to check out your podcast or want to learn more about you, maybe learn more about your consulting business, what's the best way for people to connect with you?
Sure thing. So my website is terminalvalue.biz. That's probably the best place to find all my stuff. If you're interested in just the audio podcast, that will be terminalvaluepodcast.com. Or you can also, I have a simple link for my YouTube channel. Just go to terminalvaluevideo.com or search Terminal Value on YouTube, and that'll take you to the YouTube channel.
Awesome, man. Well, thank you so much, Doug, for coming on and sharing with me and the audience. And Just great conversation, man. It was awesome talking to you a couple months ago. Awesome talking to you today. So,
all right.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of From Embers to Excellence. Please visit hollenbachleadership.com for additional content, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a review.